"Stand up," the bailiff barked. The sound of the gavel hitting the desk echoed like a final heartbeat. The courtroom was dead silent. The boy stood slowly, 17, hands cuffed, wrists bruised, eyes tired, but not broken. He looked too young to be standing where he stood, too young to face what he was about to hear. The judge's voice was cold, clipped, almost bored. "For the crime of first-degree murder, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Gasps, whispers. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "Another one." The boy didn't speak. He didn't cry. But his fingers clenched just slightly, the only thing betraying the storm inside him. His lawyer, public defender, barely looked at him, didn't even pat his shoulder, didn't say, "We'll appeal," just packed his notes, like it was done, like it was always going to be done. "But I didn't," the boy started. "No further comments," the judge snapped. "You had your trial." Had he? It didn't feel like it. It felt like he walked into that courtroom already wearing a guilty verdict. It felt like no one listened. Not the jury, not the judge, not even his lawyer. He looked at his mother in the front row. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her eyes were wide, brimming with disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The guards moved toward him. "Wait," he said. "I need to make a call." They hesitated. One of them looked at the judge. "You've had time to call family," the judge said dismissively. "I need one call," he repeated. "Quieter, just one." A long pause. The room held its breath. The judge gave a slight nod, annoyed. A phone was brought to him. Old, scratched, jail property. He took it slowly, dialed a number from memory, the number he never gave out at school, the number he never talked about, the number that never failed. One ring, too. Then a voice answered, sharp and alert. "Yes?" He swallowed. It happened. There was silence on the other end. Then just one word. "Where?" "Jefferson County Courthouse." Another pause. Then, "I'll be there in 15. He hung up. The guard reached for the phone, but paused, suddenly unsure. Something had shifted. They all felt it. Something unseen but powerful now hung in the air. The boy stood still, eyes forward. His voice didn't shake. "You made a mistake," the judge snorted. "Plenty of guilty men say that on sentencing day." "I'm not talking about guilt," the boy said. "I'm talking about who I am." The room was restless. Something wasn't right. People shifted in their seats. Even the prosecutor glanced toward the boy now, uncertain. Outside, sirens wailed, not the kind that rushed to fires or crashes, the kind that meant someone important was coming. "Who did you call?" one of the guards asked. The boy looked straight ahead. "My father." "Your father can't help you now," the judge said. The boy didn't blink. "He's the U.S. Attorney General." That stopped everything. The judge stared. The guard turned. The prosecutor dropped her pen. "What?" The courtroom door burst open. In walked a man in a black suit, tall, confident, flanked by federal security. Every person in the room turned. He walked straight to the boy, looked him in the eyes, and then turned to face the judge. "I'm here to fix a grave injustice." The judge stood, rattled. "Who do you think you are?" The man pulled a badge from inside his coat, flashed it. "The man who signs your paycheck." The silence after that was louder than the gavel had ever been. The boy didn't smile, didn't move, just waited, because this was far from over. And now, finally, someone was going to listen. His name was Malik. He was 17 years old, and he had never been in trouble before. Not real trouble. He played basketball after school, got mostly B's, stayed out of the way, kept his head down. His mom worked 2 jobs. His dad was complicated. Important, sure, but never home. Malik didn't even tell people who his father was. Didn't want to be treated differently. Didn't want anyone thinking he was trying to skip the line. But none of that mattered when the police came. They said someone had been shot, a store clerk. They said Malik had been seen nearby, that he matched the description, that he ran when they arrived. He did run, not because he was guilty, but because they came at him with guns drawn. No questions, no explanations, just guns. And fear. They slammed him to the ground, put a knee in his back, called him names. He remembered one of the officers laughing. "Got us another one." He kept saying, "I didn't do anything," but no one heard him. Or maybe they did. They just didn't care. At the station, he asked for a lawyer. They gave him a public defender. The man yawned during their first meeting, said it was a tough case and that Malik might want to take a deal for something he didn't do. The evidence? A hoodie that looked like his, a witness who wasn't sure, a camera that caught a blur running down a dark street, that was all. No fingerprints, no weapon, no motive, but he was there, and he was black, and that was enough for them. The trial moved fast, too fast. Every time Malik wanted to speak, his lawyer told him not to. "Let me handle it," he'd say, but he never really did. The prosecutor painted Malik like a gang member, like a threat. She showed pictures of him with friends, some throwing up peace signs, She twisted them into something ugly. They act like I'm a monster, Malik whispered to his mom during the trial. Like I'm not even a person. His mom gripped his hand. You're my baby, she said. Don't let them take that from you. But sitting there, day after day, being called things he wasn't, being stared at like an animal behind glass, it was hard not to lose pieces of himself. He watched people avoid his mother in the hallway, watched his classmates at school post things online like, maybe he did it or should have known. Friends stopped texting. Teachers went quiet. It was like the world decided he was guilty, before the jury even did. The worst part wasn't the fear, it was the shame, the kind that didn't belong to him, but got dumped on him anyway. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Some nights in his cell he stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what freedom felt like, what silence sounded like without doors slamming, without guards shouting, without chains rattling. But through it all, he never told anyone who his father was. He didn't want the trial to be about power. He wanted someone to believe him because he was telling the truth, not because of a name, not because of politics. But no one did. And when that verdict came down, when the judge said, life without parole, it didn't feel real. It felt like someone had pressed pause on the world and the air had been sucked out of the room. That moment, standing there, hands cuffed, knees weak, he felt smaller than he ever had before, like he was disappearing, like they had already buried him, until he picked up the phone. He didn't know what his father would do. They hadn't talked in months. They only spoke when it really mattered. And this, finally, really mattered. He didn't expect a rescue, he expected a fight. And in that tiny sliver of hope, that last call, something in him started to come back. Something stubborn, something quiet and burning. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every kid like him who never got to make that call. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. The man who had just walked in, polished suit, calm authority, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His presence did all the talking. I need the transcript of this trial, he said simply. Now. One of the clerks moved, faster than she ever had before. The judge hesitated. This is highly irregular. No, the man cut in. What's irregular is a 17-year-old with no record being handed a life sentence based on circumstantial evidence and lazy prosecution. Malik watched silent. He wasn't used to people defending him like this. Not like that, not with power. The judge tried to puff up. You're crossing lines. I wrote the lines, Malik's father said. Voice low but firm. Whispers filled the courtroom. Reporters outside were already pressing against the doors. Phones were out. People were recording. The prosecutor stepped forward, nervous, but still pretending to be confident. This was a fair trial. No, it was a rushed trial, he replied. And now I'm going to prove it. He turned to Malik. His face softened. Did they even let you speak? Malik shook his head once. His father turned back. Start by unsealing the body cam footage. All of it. There was hesitation. But this man was not someone to ignore. Not here. Not now. The footage was pulled up. The room was silent. And then it played. The screen showed two officers rushing into a corner store. No warning, no questions. Malik, in the back holding a soda, looked up just as they shouted and drew their weapons. He raised his hands, clearly terrified. Get down. One officer screamed. The video played on. Malik being slammed, cuffed, his voice shaking. I didn't do anything, I was just... The video cut. The prosecutor tried to speak, but no words came. Malik's father didn't flinch. Let's play the rest. The second angle showed something different. A figure running out the back door, taller, bigger, wearing the same hoodie. But it wasn't Malik. The camera caught a glimpse of his face. It wasn't. Malik. Gasps. Malik's mother clutched her chest. The judge paled. The defense attorney stood frozen, shame written all over him. Malik didn't react at first. He couldn't. His mind was too full. Anger, relief, sadness, all colliding in silence. Why? Wasn't this shown in court? His father demanded. The prosecutor stammered. It wasn't submitted. Because you didn't request it, he snapped. You were too busy painting a young black boy as dangerous. The room turned hot. No one looked each other in the eye. No one moved. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure. Sir, should we uncuff him? The man said. There was a pause, then the click of chains being undone. The cuffs fell to the floor. Malik rubbed his wrists, slow, disbelieving. Still, the judge tried to hold his ground. That doesn't prove. You sentenced a child to life without reviewing the full footage, his father said. You allowed racial bias to fill the gaps your evidence couldn't. Now wait just a minute. People like you don't get to wait anymore, he said, eyes locked on the bench. The judge's mouth opened, then closed. From the corner, someone whispered. He said, people like you. Another said, good. The tide was turning, but Malik wasn't done. He stepped forward. His voice was quiet but strong. "When I was arrested, I didn't say who my dad was," he said, "because I wanted you to believe me for me, not for him." No one interrupted. "You all looked at me and saw a criminal. Not a kid, not a son, not a student, just a hoodie and brown skin." He looked at the prosecutor. "You never asked me what happened. You just told your story and made everyone believe it." Then the judge. "You didn't protect me. You buried me." No defense. No reply. Malik stood taller. "You thought I had no one. But I did. I always did." Outside the courtroom, news cameras flashed. Word had already spread. Inside, the silence was thick with guilt. His father stepped beside him. "This isn't over," he said. "Every person who failed you, they'll answer for it." But Malik shook his head. "I don't want revenge." His voice cracked a little. "I want change." His father looked at him proud. The judge finally spoke, but softer now, smaller. "We'll review the case. This will need to go to appeals." "No," Malik said. "This needs to go to the world." And it would, because this wasn't just a court case anymore. It was a warning, a spotlight, a message, and Malik was no longer just a kid in cuffs. He was a name they would remember. The courtroom was no longer a place of order. It had become a battleground of truth, and the truth was starting to sting. Every person who had stood so tall a few minutes ago now looked smaller. The judge couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The prosecutor's hands were shaking, and the public defender, he was already halfway to the door. Malik remained in the center of it all, no longer in chains, but still carrying the weight of what they'd done to him. His father stepped forward, the U.S. Attorney General, one of the most powerful legal figures in the country. But in that moment, he wasn't standing there in a federal capacity. He was standing there as a father whose son had almost been buried alive by the very system he'd spent his life defending. And then came the moment no one saw coming. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a sleek leather folder and handed it to the court clerk. "Read it," he said. The clerk unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning quickly before she looked up at the judge, pale. "Sir, this is a full investigative order issued by the Department of Justice." The judge blinked. "What kind of investigation?" The father's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Into Jefferson County's systemic mishandling of juvenile cases involving minority defendants. Into the unusually high conviction rate under your court. Into the record number of plea deals pushed by unqualified public defenders. And into you." The courtroom fell into total silence. This is a joke," the prosecutor stuttered. "Is it?" the father replied, pulling out a second envelope. "This is a sworn affidavit from the real suspect's neighbor, the one your office ignored. It confirms the suspect confessed days ago, but your department lost the paperwork." The prosecutor went silent. The judge looked stunned. "I had no knowledge of—" "You presided over this case. You let it through," Malik's father interrupted. "The entire world is about to watch what happens when a court stops being a place of justice and becomes a machine of punishment." The courtroom door opened again. More federal agents entered. This time they weren't here for Malik. They were here for files, for records, for computers. It was no longer a local matter. It had gone national, and that's when Malik did something that shook the room more than anything else had. He pulled out a laminated ID card of his own, one he had kept tucked deep in his wallet, the one his father had given him years ago, just in case. The judge looked at it and blinked. It read, "Department of Justice, Junior Legal Intern, Malik A. Carter," the same last name as the man now dismantling the courtroom, the same last name as the boy they just tried to destroy. "You interned for the DOJ?" the prosecutor said quietly. "I studied case files like mine, watched my dad try to fix a system that was already broken," Malik replied. "But I never thought I'd be one of the files." And now, everyone in the room saw him differently. Not because of the badge, but because the illusion had shattered. He had never been the stereotype they thought he was. He had always been something more. He was what they feared most, a young, black man who was smart, calm, and unafraid. The panic was spreading fast now. Phones ringing, reporters trying to get inside, security confused about who to protect. And for the first time since he walked into this building, Malik saw fear on their faces, not because he was violent, but because they had underestimated him, and now the world was watching them unravel. The courtroom was no longer theirs. The walls that once held their power now echoed with their shame. The judge, the prosecutor, the guard who first grabbed Malik like he was property, they all stood beneath the weight of what they had done. But Malik stood taller. He didn't yell, he didn't break, he didn't gloat. He simply stepped forward and looked each of them in the eye. First the prosecutor, who could no longer raise his head. "You took my silence as weakness," Malik said. "You called me a threat, but never once asked me who I was. You never asked me why I was there, what I wanted to be. You saw the hoodie, the skin, and you made up a story." His voice didn't tremble. He wasn't asking for understanding. He was demanding they listen. You humiliated me for nothing. If I were anyone else, I would have walked out of here broken. Maybe not walked out at all. But now I'll make sure this never happens again. The prosecutor tried to speak, to offer a quiet, "I'm sorry," but Malik kept going, not angry, just honest. You gave me a public defender who didn't even know my name until the trial started. You built a case around fear, not facts. And you locked me in a cage like it was routine. The judge shifted in his chair, but Malik didn't let up. You had the power to stop this. You had the duty, but you chose convenience over justice. You let bias speak louder than truth. You saw me as disposable. From the back of the room, a door opened. Another man entered. Sharp suit, confident stride, U.S. Marshal's badge clipped to his belt. He approached the bench and handed the judge a document. "Sir, by order of the Department of Justice, you are temporarily relieved of your duties pending investigation." Gasps. The judge stared, stunned. This is absurd." But the marshal didn't flinch. "No, sir. What's absurd is putting a child in prison without a full investigation." The judge was led away, not in cuffs, but stripped of what had once made him untouchable. Then the prosecutor's phone rang. He looked down, read the message. His face drained of color. He didn't need to say it out loud. He was next. Malik turned to his father, who had stood beside him the entire time, not as a shield, but as a pillar. "We didn't win today because of who you are," Malik said. "We won because we refused to stay quiet." His father nodded, proud. Sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks after the silence. Malik looked out at the courtroom, reporters still writing, observers still frozen, but something had changed. For once, they weren't just watching a trial, they were watching a reckoning, and for the first time in that room, justice wasn't wearing a robe. It was standing tall, 17 years old, with steady eyes and unshaken dignity. When Malik stepped out of the courthouse, the sun hit his face like a blessing. The chains were gone, the stain on his name was gone, but the memory, the weight of what almost happened, would never leave him. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, but Malik didn't speak to them. Not yet. This moment wasn't for headlines. It was for him, for his mother, who wept silently while holding his hand like she never wanted to let go again. For his father, who stood behind him, not just as the U.S. Attorney General, but as a man who had nearly lost his son to a system he fought every day justice had been served. But the wounds weren't fully healed. Malik hadn't walked away untouched. He had walked away transformed. He turned and looked at the courthouse one last time. That building was supposed to represent fairness, but for him, it had almost become a tomb. And still, he didn't leave angry. He left determined. In the weeks that followed, Malik's story went everywhere. News anchors called it a miscarriage of justice. Legal experts called it a wake-up call. Activists called it proof that the system needed fixing. Not later, but now. But for Malik, it was something deeper. He began to speak. At schools, at youth programs, on podcasts. Not about revenge, not about hate, but about truth. He told kids like him that silence was not safety, that speaking up didn't make you weak. That dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you hold even when the world tries to crush it. He looked people in the eye and told them what it meant to be judged before being known. What it felt like to have your entire future taken away in seconds. Not because of what you did, but because of what someone assumed you were. And people listened, because his voice wasn't just strong, it was earned. The judge who sentenced him was removed from the bench pending investigation. The prosecutor faced disciplinary action, and the public defender's office was restructured entirely, with new oversight to make sure no child was ever again just a case file on a desk. Malik didn't smile when those announcements were made. He didn't cheer. He simply nodded, because this was the victory, not just his freedom, but the ripple effect of his pain forcing change. And years later, when he stood in front of a new courtroom, this time as a law student preparing to argue his first mock case, he looked at the bench and remembered. He remembered the cold courtroom, the handcuffs, the sentence that tried to define his worth. And then he remembered the moment he stood up and took it all back, because the lesson wasn't just about injustice, it was about who gets to write the ending. Malik wrote his, and it was powerful, because respect is not based on appearance. Dignity is a right, not a privilege. Because justice is not about who shouts the loudest, it's about who refuses to be silenced. Because character will always outlast assumption, and because sometimes, the most broken moments become the beginning of something unbreakable. If this story moved you, don't scroll past, share it, talk about it, let it echo beyond this screen. Because for every Malik, there's another kid still trapped, still silenced, still waiting to be seen. Change starts with awareness. Justice begins with us. Your voice matters. Use it.